So we've had the autumn statement, and like most autumn statements and budget these days, quite a lot of it was trailed in advance. So very few surprises. We were told, the Chancellor said a number of times in his speech, he had 110 measures in his toolkit to drive the economy forward. But having read all 110 now, I can confidently say most of them are pretty small and inconsequential. We did have some good stuff around housing, around business rates, other supply side measures, just to try and get things moving and drive productivity. But the big news of the day were the changes to the tax regime for workers and also the full expensing of capital expenses for businesses. So we had a fair idea that something was going to be done about the taxes paid by workers, and it could have been an income tax change, it could have been a national insurance change. In the end, it turned out to be a national insurance change and more than we were expecting. So for employees, we've got a drop in the main rate of employees' national insurance from 12% down to 10%. So a 2% reduction. I think most were expecting a 1%. And that applies sooner than it might otherwise. It's going to apply from the 6th of January 2024. So it will arrive in the pay packet after Christmas. The most any employee is going to save is about £62.83. That is the 2% saving on the bit of the earnings that could be subject to that sort of national insurance. The self-employed are also going to get a reduction as well, although not quite as much. So the self-employed, the Class 4 national insurance that's being paid will drop from 9% down to 8%, so a 1% reduction, whereas their employed counterparts are going down by 2%. And that's being kicked back a bit later until the 6th of April 2024. We've also got a bit of playing around with Class 2 national insurance. So Class 2 national insurance, £3.45 per week. For most people, that's going to be abolished. So the combination for self-employed people between the 9% going down to the 8% and the abolition of Class 2 national insurance is a maximum saving of just a bit more than £550. That's not means tested, so whether you're a self-employed window cleaner or a partner in a Magic Circle law firm earning millions, everybody's going to save that same £550-ish per year when these changes come in April 2024. These changes are quite expensive for the Treasury. The employees' changes, so the 2% reduction in Class 1 national insurance is going to cost about £8.7 billion in 24-25. For self-employed people, the two changes, the first, the 9 to 8%, is going to cost £345 million. And the abolition of Class 2 national insurance is £380 million. So the self-employed change is significantly less costly than the changes for employees, mainly because there are more employees than there are self-employed people. The reason it was a national insurance change, well, one, it holds good to the Chancellor's promise that he's going to do something for workers, make sure that hard work pays. But a change to national insurance is significantly cheaper than a change to income tax. A 1% cut in the basic rate of income tax, which would have been the equivalent cut if he decided to do it to income tax rather than national insurance, would have cost £5.7 billion. So he managed to do a 2% cut to national insurance at £8.7 billion. If it were 2% of income tax, that would have been £10 billion plus per year. Although this is a clever bit of sleight of hand, it means it's less costly for the Treasury. It means that pensioners, buy-to-let landlords, people living off investment income are not going to benefit from this change. So full expensing, it was talked about in the same sentence as trying to increase productivity in the UK. We spend our entire time looking across to Europe and the US and wondering why productivity is better in those places than it is here. Today's reason is we're not investing enough in infrastructure, in plant and equipment, in businesses to make the employee base more effective. So in order to encourage businesses to invest more in infrastructure, full expensing, which has been around and was always going to be around until April 2026, is now being made permanent. And this is, as a tax policy, it's a good idea because full expensing, which is relevant to very large businesses, for reasons I'll explain. These very large businesses are planning out their capital expenditure over a 10-year period. Telling them they've got a tax relief for the next 3 years is not very helpful for long-term planning and investment. So from a structural point of view, this is good news and has cross-party support and support from a lot of the trade bodies as well. However, it's going to have very little impact on almost every business in the UK. And why I say that is because most businesses in the UK are not very large. Most businesses in the UK can already deduct £1 million of expenditure on capital expense under the annual investment allowance. It's only those businesses that are spending more than £1 million a year on capital expenditure that even need to worry about this. and then those businesses that are going to carry on spending at that rate past April 2026. So we're talking big oil and gas infrastructure, we're talking railways, we're talking, these bigger businesses, not your owner-managed business, that makes cardboard boxes. Now we've got the annual investment allowance will continue on. We've got the same problem with full expensing that we've always had. Full expensing was first introduced to compensate companies for the corporation tax rate going up from 19% to 25%. So saying you're going to be paying more corporation tax, but you can deduct more. So in the round, you might not be worse off. So it was always a relief directed at companies. Now the 25% corporation tax rate is around and probably here to stay. There isn't really a lot of argument for limiting this full expensing relief to companies, but it is. And that means partnerships and the self-employed will not be able to use it. Now, if you're a jobbing window cleaner, you probably don't need to have full expensing because you're unlikely to spend more than £1 million on your plant and equipment. If you're a large partnership that fits out offices and employs thousands of people, well, actually full expensing would be quite handy. The forecast of what it's going to cost tells a sort of slightly unusual story. The full expensing is going to cost ultimately more than £10 billion a year. That is a price the government are prepared to pay because they're expecting full expensing to increase productivity, which should increase GDP by 0.1%. And turning the dial 0.1% on GDP is a good thing to do. Now, however, for the first couple of years before it comes in, strangely, full expensing is expecting to raise revenue. And the only reason I can think that is that businesses that were going to accelerate their capital expenditure now have no pressure to accelerate their capital expenditure, so we'll push it back into the later years. So even though this policy is expected to increase expenditure on infrastructure, actually the forecasts are showing that it's probably going to slow it down immediately. But as it becomes part of the ecosystem in the corporate tax regime, businesses will be able to spend more regularly, more often, and get more tax relief.